Live from Waterford and Dungarvan, this is Waterford at 1 News.
Good afternoon, I'm Sinead Aherne. Today's top stories. Health officials will decide this week what coronavirus restrictions, if any, should be eased on May the 5th. 7 people with coronavirus are still being treated at University Hospital Waterford. There's been a 30% increase in domestic violence reports to the Gardaí in some areas since the lockdown began. Gardaí in Waterford are warning that if people break social distancing rules, restrictions will be in place for even longer. They say they're seeing an increase in people flouting the regulations. Inspector Gavin Haggerty says people need to reconsider what they're doing.
We're not in a situation yet where you can get into your car and drive to scenic spots. We're not in a situation yet where you can go outside of 2 kilometres if you're exercising. So if you want to go out on your bike and you want to go for a cycle, yeah, that's fine, but you have to stay with 2 kilometres from your home. We're not in a situation yet where you can go and meet your friends in their house and have parties. And we're seeing that. We're seeing people starting to congregate together. We're seeing people going to our parks or public spaces and gathering groups. We're not in that space yet.
He says people's individual actions have consequences.
The consequences of somebody just taking a decision that goes outside of the regulations, never mind their interaction with An Garda Síochána and the consequences that may arise out of that, but they'll have consequences for their fellow citizens, there's consequences for their communities, and there's consequences for the country at large. As Dr. Holohan said, is that if people see the course and stay with the restrictions, then that gives the government scope and opportunity to make changes. But if people don't adhere to the restrictions, then it's taking those decisions out of government's hands, and that's not what we want.
Health officials will decide this week what coronavirus restrictions, if any, should be eased on May the 5th. There are now over 19,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 here, and 1,087 people have lost their lives, as Stephanie Rowan reports.
Dublin still has the highest number of coronavirus cases, followed by Cork and Kildare. However, if you look at the breakdown per 100,000 of the population, Cavan has the highest number, followed by Dublin and then Monaghan. Among those who've lost their lives are 2 people aged between 15 and 24, 68 between 25 and 64, and 812 over the age of 65. There are now 208 coronavirus clusters in nursing homes and 114 in residential institutions. The number of cases has been rising ever since all staff and residents in these settings are being tested, leading to speculation either no or very few restrictions will be eased on the 5th of May. Chair of the Coronavirus Expert Advisory Group, Cillian de Gascoigne, is giving little away.
I think we're looking at the numbers. I suppose it's something of a mixed picture, that the number of people going into hospital, the number of people going into intensive care has improved. Those numbers are coming down, but we're still obviously seeing a large number of cases on a daily basis.
Cillian de Gascoigne also says they're discussing whether people should have to wear face masks in certain settings whenever restrictions are eased.
7 people with coronavirus are still being treated at University Hospital Waterford. The HSE figures from 8 o'clock last night show there were no new cases over the previous 24 hours. 4 suspected cases are awaiting test results. 2 people remain in intensive care. There are 135 confirmed cases in Waterford as of midnight on Friday. That's an increase of 6 cases since Thursday night. There's been a 30% increase in domestic violence reports to the Gardaí in some areas since the lockdown began. Women's Aid says it's also seen an increase in calls to its services, according to the Irish Times. But it's understood that the true spike in domestic violence is likely to be much higher than reported because many victims are now in lockdown with their abuser. Garda Chief Superintendent of the Waterford Division, Pádraig Dunn, says people affected should not hesitate to contact Gardaí.
Immediately phone 999 or 112. We have a 24-hour service throughout the county, throughout the city. Our job in relation to domestic violence is to keep the victim safe. Where we are called, we have a pro-arrest policy and we will implement that policy stringently. What I have seen that we're getting domestic violence called where alcohol is a big factor in it.
A Waterford city-based counselling service says only the online gambling companies operating in Ireland know what the increase of use is since bookmakers were closed because of the coronavirus pandemic. CEO of Problem Gambling Ireland, Barry Grant, told Damien Tiernan on Daysha today that other countries have seen an increase of over 20% in new accounts in the last month. He says those figures could be repeated in Ireland.
In Australia, they did a consumer spending big research piece, and they looked at, what do people stop spending money on, what they started spending more money on. The single biggest increase in consumer spending in Australia in the first 2 weeks of lockdown was on online gambling. It was a 67% increase. like ahead of everything else, ahead of alcohol, cigarette, pizza deliveries, you name it.
A youth information website says there was a 60% increase in the number of young people seeking support last month. It comes after Health Minister Simon Harris announced a further €1.1 million investment into online mental health supports. Waterford man Ian Power from spunout.ie says the increase in demand for support is directly linked to coronavirus.
In the month of March, the numbers of young people who were reaching out for support increased 60%, and our text line saw a 44% increase, and around a third of texters were directly referencing either coronavirus, virus or COVID in their conversations.
A former Taoiseach doesn't believe it's practical to simply tell people crossing the border from the north to go home. A loophole in the emergency Garda powers means people who travel from the north for a day trip do not fall under the 2-kilometre limit. It's led to calls for an all-island policing strategy to deal with the issue. Former Taoiseach and Minister for Justice Michael McDowell thinks it's difficult to find a solution.
You can't actually say to somebody on the northern side of the border, you may not cross the border because of the COVID regulations. Maybe there's the case for increased scrutiny on the border, but on the other hand, what are you going to say of the bridge between Lifford and Strabane? Are you going to tell people, sorry, go home? Or what are you doing coming across the border? I don't think that's practical either.
Gardaí are to prepare a file for an inquest at the coroner's court following the death of a swimmer in a drowning accident in Tramore on Saturday. The body of the 63-year-old man was spotted in shallow water by women walking on the beach at around 25 to 2 in the afternoon. The emergency services were alerted, including the Irish Coast Guard helicopter Rescue 117, Tramore, Ornalai and Gardaí. It's understood the women who found the man administered CPR, but they were unable to resuscitate him and he was pronounced dead at the scene. His body was removed to University Hospital Waterford, where a post-mortem is due to take place today to establish the cause of death. Gardaí say there's nothing to suggest anything suspicious about the man's death, which they described as a tragic accident. They've identified the man but have not released his name until all next of kin are notified. But it's understood that he was resident in Waterford City. They're trying to establish when he was last seen alive and what time he went swimming at the beach, which was quiet because of COVID-19 restrictions. A Waterford councillor says there's still a long way to go after Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil reached agreement on a joint framework to form a government. Both parties want to form a majority government of 3 or more parties or groups that will last 5 years with full and equal partnership between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil at its centre. Fine Gael councillor Damien Gagan says it's taking a long time to get a government together.
I mean, the reality is the election threw up a very, very indecisive result, split 3 ways or even 4 ways really if you bring all those independents together. A long way to go yet before any government can be formed. And I mean, the election was held on February the 8th and here we are now in the middle of April, and I think that's proof of just how indecisive a result that the general election threw up.
And the Rose of Tralee has been cancelled for the first time in its history. The County Kerry Festival was due to take place in August. Organisers say it will now be postponed until August 2021. Host of the Rose of Tralee, Dahi O'Shea, says it's the right decision for health and safety.
We tried everything. We were thinking even to have a Rose of Tralee at the end of October, the bank holiday weekend, just with social distancing and everything that goes along with that. And part of the sparkle of the Rose of Tralee is having roses come from Australia and American from all around the world. So again, that wouldn't be possible as well. So listen, I'm heartbroken.
WLR Sport, Ireland's local station of the year.
Starting with Gaelic Games, where the GAA President John Horan says the hurling and football championships could run into 2021. He also said there is no truth to the reports that there are plans to allow inter-county teams to resume training in the summer. Horan said the club game will be first to get back up and running when it's safe to do so. The GAA said earlier this month it was highly unlikely that the championships would begin before the month of July, and Horan said there could be a further delay due to the ban on mass gatherings until the end of August. The Premier League will hold further talks this week as it targets a June return behind closed doors. Football has been suspended in England since the 13th of March and will only return if the UK government says it can. Meanwhile, Serie A is moving closer to a return after the Italian Prime Minister announced the country is set to ease lockdown restrictions. Italian clubs will be allowed to train fully on the 18th of May and the league could resume in early June. In rugby, the Women's Six Nations could be moved to a different time of the year in an attempt to increase exposure and avoid clashing with the men's tournament in February and March. The women's competition has had no title sponsor for the last 2 seasons, and there's also no prize money on offer compared to the €18 million available in the men's tournament. While in Formula One, bosses say they're increasingly confident the season will start on July the 5th with the Austrian Grand Prix. The opening 10 races of the season have all either been postponed or cancelled. The French Grand Prix has become the second race to confirm it won't go ahead at all in 2020, along with Monaco, while the other race have been postponed. This year's British Grand Prix will have to take place behind closed doors in July if it can still go ahead. WLR asking you to stay at home. Our next bulletin is at 2.